I still remember the exact moment when everything changed. It wasn't when I sold my company for over $200 million, or when I appeared on the cover of Forbes, or even when I bought my dream penthouse overlooking Lake Michigan. It was at my brother's engagement dinner, when his fiancée looked across the table at me and said the words that would forever alter my relationship with my family, "You're the founder." But let me start from the beginning, because the real story isn't about that moment of revelation. It's about the 32 years that led up to it, and the 5 years I spent building something extraordinary while my own family believed I was failing at life. Growing up in Highland Park, Chicago, our dinner table felt more like a boardroom than a place for family meals. Every evening, my father would sit at the head of our mahogany dining table, still wearing his surgical scrubs, while my mother, impeccably dressed even after a 12-hour day at her law firm, would pour wine and ask for our daily reports. My brother Jason, 3 years older and seemingly perfect in every way, would regale them with stories of his latest academic achievements, his volunteer work at the hospital, or his acceptance into various honor societies. Then it would be my turn, and I would shrink into my chair, mumbling about coding projects or computer programs I was working on. My father would nod politely, the way adults do when children show them finger paintings, while my mother would quickly steer the conversation toward my grades in more important subjects like English or history. The message was clear: my passion for technology was cute, but not serious. Not worthy of the Mitchell family legacy. My father, Dr. Richard Mitchell, was one of Chicago's most respected cardiac surgeons. His hands had literally held beating hearts, saved countless lives, and earned him a reputation that opened doors throughout the city. My mother, Diana Mitchell, was a partner at a prestigious corporate law firm, the kind of woman who could negotiate million-dollar deals before breakfast and still make it to Jason's soccer games in the afternoon. Together, they had built a life that looked perfect from the outside, and they expected their children to maintain that standard. Jason fell in line effortlessly. He was everything they wanted in a son: charming, academically gifted, and determined to follow in our father's footsteps. Pre-med at Northwestern, summa cum laude, already talking about which medical schools would be lucky to have him. At family gatherings, relatives would pat his shoulder and say things like, "Following in Dad's footsteps, I see. Another doctor in the family." Then they would turn to me with that sympathetic smile reserved for the lesser sibling and ask, "And what are you studying, dear?" "Still playing with computers." Playing with computers. As if the countless hours I spent learning HTML and CSS, as if the websites I built for our school's drama club and student government, as if the programming competitions I entered and won, were just elaborate games. As if the future I was building for myself, line by line of code, was somehow less real than Jason's textbooks and lab coats. I learned early that my bedroom was my sanctuary. While the rest of the house buzzed with talk of surgeries and legal briefs, I would close my door and lose myself in the endless possibilities of programming. I taught myself Python when I was 14, built my first mobile app at 16, and spent my senior year of high school developing a software system that streamlined our school's event management process. When I presented it to the administration, they were amazed. They implemented it immediately, and it saved them hundreds of hours of manual work. I was so excited to share this achievement with my family. I remember practically bouncing in my chair at dinner, waiting for the right moment to tell them about the software, about how the principal had called it innovative and impressive beyond your years. But when I finally spoke up, my mother barely looked up from her salad. "That's nice, sweetheart," she said, "but you really need to focus on getting your SAT scores up if you want to get into a good pre-law program." Pre-law. They had already decided my future for me, just as they had decided that my accomplishments in technology didn't matter. That night, lying in bed, I made a promise to myself: would prove them wrong. I would build something so successful, so undeniably impressive, that they would have no choice but to see me for who I really was. The battle over college was our first major confrontation. They wanted Ivy League, preferably Harvard or Yale, with a pre-law track that would set me up to follow in my mother's footsteps. I wanted Illinois Tech, where I could dive deep into computer science and be surrounded by people who understood that technology wasn't a hobby, it was the future. "You're throwing away your potential," my father said when I showed him the acceptance letter from Illinois Tech, along with the full scholarship they had offered me. "You're brilliant, Olivia. You could be a lawyer, a doctor, someone who makes a real difference in the world." "Technology makes a real difference," I replied, but my voice was small, uncertain. I was 18 years old, and part of me still craved their approval more than my own dreams. "Playing with computers isn't a career," my mother added, not unkindly, but with the sort of finality that made it clear the discussion was over. "It's not a field for serious people, honey. You need to think about your future." But I held firm, and in the fall, I packed my bags for Illinois Tech. The day I left for college, my mother hugged me and whispered, "I hope you'll reconsider this computer science thing. It's not too late to transfer to a real program." Real program. The word stung, but they also fueled me. I was going to show them what a real program could accomplish. College was a revelation. For the first time in my life, I was surrounded by people who spoke my language, who understood that lines of code could be poetry, that algorithms could be art, that the right software could literally change the world. My professors treated my ideas with respect, my classmates challenged me to think bigger, and slowly, I began to believe in myself in a way I never had before. It was during my sophomore year that I met Emma Rodriguez. She was in my advanced data structures class, and from the first day, I could tell she was special. While other students struggled with the concepts, Emma was already thinking 3 steps ahead, seeing patterns and possibilities that others missed. She was also funny, ambitious, and came from a family that actually celebrated her achievements in technology. "My mom brags about me to everyone," Emma told me one day as we worked late in the computer lab. "She tells the grocery store clerk, the mailman, random people on the bus. My daughter is going to change the world with computers," she says. Sometimes it's embarrassing, but I love that she believes in me. I felt a stab of envy so sharp it took my breath away. What would it be like to have a mother who bragged about your accomplishments instead of dismissing them? It was Emma who sparked the idea that would eventually become Nextech. We were having coffee one afternoon when she mentioned her frustration with the healthcare system her mother navigated as a dialysis patient. "The communication is terrible," Emma said, stirring her latte with more force than necessary. "Mom's primary care doctor doesn't talk to her kidney specialist, who doesn't talk to her dietitian, who doesn't talk to the hospital. She's constantly repeating her medical history, bringing the same paperwork to different appointments, and sometimes they give her conflicting advice because they don't know what the other doctors have said." I leaned forward, intrigued. What if there was a platform that could centralize all of that? Something that would let healthcare providers communicate seamlessly, share patient information securely, and give patients a single place to access their complete medical picture. Emma's eyes lit up. "That would be revolutionary. Do you think it's possible?" I smiled, feeling that familiar spark of excitement that came with a new coding challenge. "Let's find out." We spent the rest of that semester sketching out ideas, researching existing healthcare communication systems, and identifying the gaps we could fill. By winter break, we had a rough outline for what would eventually become Nextech's flagship product, a comprehensive healthcare communication platform that would streamline information flow between providers, reduce medical errors, and improve patient outcomes. The summer after sophomore year, I went home to Highland Park with our preliminary plans tucked away in my laptop, burning with excitement to share our idea with my family. I pictured myself explaining the concept over dinner, watching my parents' faces light up with understanding and pride as they realized the magnitude of what Emma and I were building. Instead, I found myself sitting at that same mahogany table, listening to my relatives pepper me with concerned questions about my computer hobby, and helpful suggestions about real career paths. Uncle Bob, a financial advisor, spent 20 minutes explaining why I should consider business school. Aunt Margaret shared a story about her neighbor's daughter who had wasted 4 years on an engineering degree before coming to her senses and going to law school. "You're so bright, Olivia," my cousin Sarah said, reaching across the table to pat my hand. "I just hate to see you limiting yourself to technical work." Have you thought about using your analytical skills in a field with more prestige? I excused myself early that evening and called Emma from my childhood bedroom, the same room where I had spent countless hours teaching myself to code. They don't get it, I told her, pacing back and forth across the carpet that still bore the indentations from my old desk chair. They think I'm wasting my life. Then we'll have to prove them wrong, Emma said simply. We'll build something so amazing that they won't be able to ignore it. That summer, while my family thought I was lounging around the house feeling sorry for myself, Emma and I were working 18-hour days in her parents' garage, building the first prototype of Nextech. Emma's parents would bring us sandwiches and coffee, ask how the work was going, and listen with genuine interest as we explained the challenges we were solving. Mrs. Rodriguez even helped us brainstorm features based on her own experiences as a patient. By the time I returned to school for junior year, we had a working beta version and a business plan that had won 3 different campus entrepreneurship competitions. We used the prize money to file for our first patent and officially incorporate Nextech as a company. I was 20 years old and officially a co-founder and CEO, but when I went home for Thanksgiving, I might as well have been unemployed. I've been thinking, my father said as he carved the turkey that year, Jason knows someone in hospital administration at Northwestern Memorial. I could arrange for you to do some shadowing, see if you might be interested in healthcare management. It would be a way to use your computer skills in a more established field. I stared at him across the table, this man who had spent 25 years building his reputation, who understood better than anyone what it meant to pursue your passion despite obstacles, and I realized he genuinely didn't see the irony. He was offering me a job in healthcare administration while I was literally building technology to revolutionize healthcare communication. Thanks, Dad, I said quietly, but I'm actually pretty focused on my current projects right now. Your computer projects? My mother asked, and I could hear the implicit, still, in her tone. I opened my mouth to tell them about Nextech, about the competitions we had won, about the patent we had filed, about the meetings we had scheduled with potential investors. But something in their expressions stopped me. They weren't curious about my projects. They were waiting for me to outgrow them. That night, I made a decision that would shape the next 5 years of my life. I would stop trying to earn their understanding. I would build Nextech in silence, and when we succeeded, not if, but when, they would learn about it the same way everyone else did. The next 2 years of college flew by in a blur of coding, business development, and strategic planning. Emma and I spent every spare moment refining our platform, reaching out to healthcare providers for feedback, and building relationships with potential customers. We connected with Dr. Harriet Chin, a forward-thinking physician who became both a mentor and our first real customer. She piloted our system in her practice and provided invaluable insights that helped us improve the user interface and functionality. Meanwhile, my family continued to treat my career like a phase I would eventually outgrow. At my college graduation, my father pulled me aside for what I assumed would be a moment of pride and celebration. "I'm proud of you for finishing your degree," he said, straightening my cap. "Now it's time to think seriously about your future. I know you've enjoyed this computer work, but it's time to consider graduate school. Maybe an MBA, something that will give you real career prospects." Real career prospects. As if the company I had been building for the past 3 years, the company that was already generating revenue and attracting investor interest, was somehow imaginary. "Thanks, Dad," I said, forcing a smile. "I'll definitely think about it." But I wasn't thinking about graduate school. I was thinking about the series of funding round Emma and I were preparing for, about the expanded team we were planning to hire, about the hospital systems that had expressed interest in implementing our platform nationwide. After graduation, I moved into a studio apartment in Chicago's Lincoln Park neighborhood, telling my parents I was figuring things out while I looked for a real job. In reality, I was working 16-hour days, building Nextech from a tiny shared workspace in River North, surviving on ramen noodles and the occasional free lunch from investor meetings. Those early post-college months were the hardest of my life. There were days when I questioned everything, when the voices of my family seemed to echo in my head, maybe they're right. Maybe this is just a hobby. Maybe I should be looking for a real job. But then a new customer would sign up, or a user would send us feedback about how our platform had prevented a medication error, and I would remember why we were doing this. Emma was my rock during those difficult times. While her family celebrated every small milestone, our first paying customer, our first positive review in a medical journal, our first hire, mine remained obliviously dismissive. At Christmas dinner that year, my mother actually suggested I look into administrative assistant positions at her law firm. It would be good experience, she said, passing the cranberry sauce. You'd learn how real businesses operate, and who knows? Maybe you'd discover an interest in law after all. I smiled and nodded and said I would consider it, but inside I was screaming. How could they not see what I was building? How could they be so blind to what was happening right in front of them? The breakthrough came in my second year out of college. A regional healthcare network implemented our platform across all their facilities, and the results were extraordinary. Medical errors dropped by 30% in the first 6 months. Patient satisfaction scores improved dramatically. The story was picked up by Modern Healthcare magazine, and suddenly, we were getting calls from hospital systems across the country. That summer, we raised our first significant round of venture capital, $5 million from a prestigious firm that specialized in healthcare technology. I was 24 years old, employing 30 people, and finally able to pay myself a real salary. I celebrated by moving into a beautiful one-bedroom apartment with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the lake. But when I went home for my birthday that year, my mother greeted me with, "Honey, I was talking to Mrs. Patterson at book club, and her son works in IT at a big corporation. He makes very good money, and they have excellent benefits. I could ask her to put in a word for you." IT at a big corporation. As if I were some kind of underemployed technician instead of the CEO of a rapidly growing company that was revolutionizing healthcare communication. I realized then that the problem wasn't that my family didn't believe in my success. The problem was that they genuinely didn't understand what success looked like in my world. To them, a real job meant a corporate position with a recognizable title at a well-known company. Entrepreneurship, especially in technology, was foreign to them. They couldn't see the value in what I was building because they couldn't see the industry itself. So I made another decision: I would let them maintain their narrative. As far as they knew, I was still struggling, still looking for the right opportunity, still in need of their well-meaning career advice. It was easier than trying to bridge a gap that felt impossibly wide. By the time I turned 26, Nextech had grown to 50 employees and was being used by healthcare providers in 12 states. We had been featured in Forbes, TechCrunch, and the Wall Street Journal. I had been invited to speak at medical conferences and technology summits. I owned a beautiful apartment, drove a Tesla, and had more money in my investment accounts than my parents had ever talked about having. But at family dinners, I was still the daughter who worked with computers and might benefit from career counseling. The cognitive dissonance was exhausting. I would spend my days in board meetings with hospital executives and venture capitalists, making decisions that affected thousands of healthcare workers and millions of patients, and then I would go home for Sunday dinner and listen to my uncle lecture me about the importance of finding direction in my career. I started seeing a therapist, Dr. Sarah Winters, who specialized in family dynamics and professional relationships. During our sessions, she would often ask me why I continued to hide my success from my family. "Are you protecting them or protecting yourself?" she asked during one particularly difficult session. "I don't know," I admitted. "Maybe both. If I tell them the truth, either they'll dismiss it as unimportant, or they'll suddenly start treating me differently, and I won't know if it's genuine. What would genuine look like to you?" I thought about that for a long time. I think genuine would be them asking questions about my work because they're interested, not because they're worried. Genuine would be them understanding that this isn't a phase or a hobby, but the thing I was meant to do. Genuine would be them being proud of me for who I am, not disappointed that I'm not who they wanted me to be. And what if you never get that from them? Then I guess I'll have to be okay with being proud of myself. It was a revelation that took months to fully embrace. For the first time in my life, I began to separate my sense of self-worth from my family's approval. I started celebrating my achievements with Emma, with our team, with the growing network of entrepreneurs and investors who understood the magnitude of what we were building. At 28, we received our first serious acquisition offer, $30 million from a major healthcare corporation. Emma and I seriously considered it, but ultimately decided we weren't ready to give up control of our vision. We wanted to see how far we could take Nextech on our own terms. That decision led to our Series B funding round, $30 million for a minority stake, valuing the company at over $100 million. I was officially a millionaire many times over, but my family still thought I was struggling to find my way in the world. The press coverage of our funding round was extensive, but I had learned to be strategic about my public image. I gave interviews about our technology and our mission, but I always kept the focus on the company rather than on myself personally. I became known in tech circles as the ghost founder, the CEO who preferred to let her work speak for itself rather than courting personal fame. There was something powerful about being underestimated, about being invisible to the mainstream business world while building something revolutionary. I enjoyed the anonymity, the ability to move through conferences and industry events without being immediately recognized. It gave me a sense of control over my own narrative that I had never experienced while growing up. But the secrecy was also isolating. There were moments when I desperately wanted to share my excitement with my family, to have them understand that their daughter wasn't just surviving, she was thriving. When Nextech was featured on the cover of Forbes, I stared at the magazine on the newsstand for 10 minutes, imagining what it would feel like to bring it home and place it on that mahogany dining room table. Instead, I bought a copy for myself and kept it in my desk drawer, a private reminder of how far I had come. The years blended together in a whirlwind of growth and achievement. Nextech expanded internationally, partnering with healthcare systems in Canada, the UK, and Australia. We developed new products, hired brilliant people, and consistently exceeded our most optimistic projections. I bought a penthouse in downtown Chicago, invested in other startups, and established a scholarship fund for women in computer science. Through it all, my family continued to worry about my career prospects. Everything changed on a Tuesday evening in October, when my mother called with news that would set in motion the events that would finally bring my two worlds crashing together. "Olivia, darling, I have wonderful news," she said, her voice bright with excitement. "Jason and Sophia have set a date for their wedding. We're having an engagement party next weekend at the Bluebird, and of course we want you there." Sophia. Jason had been dating her for almost 2 years, but I had only met her briefly at a few family gatherings. I knew she worked in healthcare, something in business development or strategy, but I had never paid much attention to the details. Jason's girlfriends came and went, and I had learned not to get too invested in learning about them until things got serious. Apparently, things were now serious. "That's great, Mom," I said, genuinely happy for my brother. "I'll be there." "Wonderful. And Olivia, honey, please make sure you wear something appropriate. This is going to be a very nice event, and Sophia's parents will be there. They're quite successful, her father runs a medical device company, and I want to make a good impression." I bristled slightly at the implication that I couldn't be trusted to dress appropriately for a nice dinner, but I let it slide. "Of course, Mom. I'll make sure to look presentable." After we hung up, I Googled Sophia Winters, out of curiosity, thinking I might learn a bit more about my future sister-in-law. What I found made my blood run cold. Sophia Winters wasn't just some healthcare professional. She was the director of strategic acquisitions at Horizon Health Technologies, one of the largest healthcare corporations in the world. And according to her LinkedIn profile, she specialized in identifying and acquiring promising healthcare technology companies. Companies exactly like Nextech. I sat back in my chair, staring at my computer screen, as the implications began to sink in. For months, Horizon had been circling Nextech, making increasingly serious inquiries about a potential acquisition. We had been in preliminary discussions with their corporate development team, and just last week, they had submitted an initial offer, $215 million for full acquisition of the company. $215 million. It was more money than I had ever imagined, enough to make Emma and me incredibly wealthy and to secure the future of Nextech under a larger corporate umbrella. But it also meant giving up the independence we had fought so hard to maintain. And now I was learning that the woman my brother was planning to marry might be the person leading those acquisition discussions. I called Emma immediately. "You're not going to believe this," I said, and proceeded to explain the situation. "Wait," Emma said when I finished. "So your brother's fiancée might be the person trying to buy our company, and your family has no idea that you're the CEO of the company she's trying to buy?" "That's exactly right." Emma was quiet for a moment. "Olivia, this is like something out of a movie. What are you going to do?" "I have no idea," I admitted. "I mean, I can't exactly skip my brother's engagement party. But I also can't sit there making small talk with the woman who might be negotiating to buy my company while my family continues to think I'm unemployed." "Maybe this is the universe telling you it's time to come clean," Emma suggested gently. "Maybe this is the moment you finally tell them the truth." I considered that as I lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling of my penthouse while the lights of Chicago twinkled below. Part of me was terrified at the prospect of finally revealing the truth to my family. What if they didn't believe me? What if they thought I was exaggerating or lying? What if they suddenly started treating me differently, and I realized that their love had always been conditional? But another part of me was tired. Tired of hiding, tired of pretending, tired of listening to their well-meaning advice about finding a real career, while I was literally running a multi-million-dollar company that was changing the healthcare industry. The next few days passed in a blur of preparation and anxiety. I chose my outfit carefully, a classic black dress that was elegant without being ostentatious, professional without being stuffy. I wanted to look like myself, not like someone trying to prove a point. The morning of the engagement party, my mother called with last-minute details. "Oh, and Olivia," she said just before hanging up, "Jason's future in-laws are lovely people, but they're quite accomplished. Dr. Winters, Sophia's father, has built an incredibly successful company, and they move in very impressive social circles. I just want you to be prepared. They might ask about your career, and I don't want you to feel uncomfortable." Uncomfortable. As if the problem were my feelings rather than their assumptions. "I'm sure I'll be fine, Mom," I said. "Of course you will, sweetheart. And who knows? Maybe Dr. Winters knows someone in the tech industry who could help you find something more stable." I hung up the phone and looked at myself in the mirror. I was 32 years old, a successful CEO, a millionaire, a person who had built something meaningful and important from nothing but an idea and determination. But to my family, I was still the daughter who needed help finding a stable job. That evening, I walked into the Bluebird with my head held high, determined to be authentically myself regardless of how the night unfolded. The restaurant was exactly the kind of place my parents loved, elegant, traditional, expensive enough to feel exclusive without being flashy. Jason and Sophia were holding court at a large table in the center of the dining room, surrounded by family and friends. Sophia looked radiant in a navy blue dress, her dark hair styled in an elegant updo. She was clearly in her element, charming everyone with stories about her work and her travels. When she spotted me approaching the table, she stood and gave me a warm hug. "Olivia. I'm so glad you could make it," she said with genuine enthusiasm. "I feel like we barely got to talk at Christmas. I've been looking forward to getting to know you better." "Congratulations," I said, meaning it. "You and Jason seem really happy together." "We are," she said, beaming. "And I have to say, I'm excited to have a sister. I've always wanted one." I smiled, thinking how ironic it was that we might have been negotiating a business deal while planning to become family members. The dinner proceeded as most family gatherings did, with my parents playing the role of proud hosts, Jason basking in congratulations, and me sitting quietly at the periphery, observing the dynamics I knew so well. Sophia's parents were indeed impressive. Dr. Winters had the kind of confident bearing that came from years of success, while Mrs. Winters was gracious and warm, asking thoughtful questions about everyone's lives and careers. When the conversation turned to me, I felt the familiar knot form in my stomach. "And what do you do, Olivia?" Dr. Winters asked politely. Before I could answer, my father jumped in. "Olivia works in computers," he said, in the same tone someone might use to say, "Olivia works in retail," or "Olivia works in food service," not dismissive, exactly, but clearly not expecting anyone to be particularly impressed. "Oh, that's interesting," Mrs. Winters said kindly. "What kind of computer work?" I opened my mouth to respond, but my mother was already redirecting the conversation. "She's very talented with technology," she said, "but she's still exploring her options. We keep telling her she should consider going back to school, maybe get an MBA. She has so much potential. Still exploring her options. So much potential." The words hung in the air like a judgment, and I felt that familiar mix of anger and sadness that had defined so many family gatherings over the years. But then something shifted. Instead of shrinking into myself the way I usually did, I found myself sitting up straighter, meeting Dr. Winters' eyes with confidence. "I work in healthcare technology," I said clearly. "I'm involved in developing platforms that improve communication between healthcare providers." It wasn't the whole truth, but it was true, and it was more than I had ever shared with my family before. "That sounds fascinating," Sophia said, and something in her voice made me look at her more carefully. "What kind of platforms?" Before I could answer, my Uncle Bob chimed in with a laugh. "She's being modest. Olivia's great with computers, but she's too smart to waste her talents in tech forever. We keep telling her she should use that analytical mind for something more substantial, like law or business." More substantial. The words hit me like a physical blow, and I saw Sophia's expression change slightly, a flicker of something I couldn't quite identify crossing her face. The conversation moved on, as it always did, but I noticed Sophia glancing at me throughout the rest of the dinner with an expression that seemed almost curious. When dessert was served, she leaned across the table toward me. "Olivia," she said quietly, "can I ask you something? What did you say your last name was again?" I felt my heart begin to race. "Mitchell," I said carefully. "Why?" Sophia was quiet for a moment, studying my face with an intensity that made me nervous. Then, in a voice that cut through the ambient conversation like a knife, she said, "You're Olivia Mitchell from Nextech." It wasn't a question. It was a statement of recognition, delivered with the kind of certainty that comes from someone who has spent months studying financial documents and corporate profiles. The table fell silent. Every conversation stopped mid-sentence, every fork paused halfway to its destination, every eye turned toward Sophia and me. "I'm sorry," Jason said with a confused laugh. "I think there's been some mistake. Olivia doesn't work for any company called Nextech." But Sophia was still looking at me, and I could see the pieces clicking into place in her mind. "You're the founder," she said softly. "You're the CEO. You're the ghost founder everyone in our industry talks about." The silence stretched on for what felt like an eternity. I could feel my family's eyes on me, could sense their confusion and disbelief, could almost hear the wheels turning in their heads as they tried to process what Sophia was saying. "Olivia," my father said finally, his voice strange and uncertain. "What is she talking about?" I looked around the table at the faces of the people who had shaped my entire life, who had watched me grow up, who thought they knew everything about me. And for the first time in 5 years, I told them the truth. "Nextech is my company," I said quietly. "I founded it with my business partner Emma 7 years ago. We've been building healthcare communication technology. We have over 200 employees now, and we work with healthcare systems across North America and Europe." The silence that followed was deafening. My mother's wine glass was frozen halfway to her lips. My father's mouth had fallen open. Jason was staring at me as if I had just announced that I was secretly a space alien. "That's impossible," my mother said finally. "Nextech is a major company. I've heard of them. They were in the Wall Street Journal. Yes, I said simply. We were. Sophia, who had started this revelation, seemed almost as shocked as my family. Olivia, do you have any idea how much your company is worth? Do you know that Horizon has been trying to acquire Nextech for over a year? I nodded. I know. We've been in discussions with your team. My team? Sophia's eyes widened. Olivia, I'm the lead on the Nextech acquisition. I've been studying your company for months. I know everything about your financials, your growth projections, your competitive advantages. I just never knew what you looked like because you're so private about media appearances. The irony was too perfect, too absurd to be anything but cosmic justice. The woman my brother was planning to marry had been trying to buy my company while my family worried about my career prospects. This is insane, Jason said, running his hands through his hair. Olivia, why didn't you tell us? Why did you let us think, why did you let us worry about you? I looked at my brother, this person I had grown up with, this person who had always been the golden child while I had been the afterthought, and I felt a lifetime of hurt and frustration bubbling to the surface. When would I have told you? I asked quietly. At Christmas, when Mom suggested I apply to be an administrative assistant at her law firm. At Easter, when Dad offered to help me find something stable in hospital administration. At my college graduation, when you all made it clear that my degree was just a stepping stone to something more serious. The table was still silent, but I could see the dawning recognition in their faces as they began to understand the magnitude of what I was saying. For 5 years, I continued, I've been building something incredible. Something that's changing how healthcare providers communicate, something that's preventing medical errors and saving lives. And for 5 years, you've all been waiting for me to give it up and find a real job. My mother was crying now, tears streaming down her cheeks as she realized the implications of my words. Olivia, we didn't know. We didn't understand. You didn't ask, I said gently but firmly. You never asked what I was actually working on, or whether I was happy, or whether I felt fulfilled by my work. You just assumed that because it wasn't the path you would have chosen for me, it wasn't a real path at all. Dr. Winters, who had been listening to this exchange with growing amazement, finally spoke up. Olivia, if you're really the CEO of Nextech, then you're one of the most successful entrepreneurs in healthcare technology. My colleagues talk about your company all the time. The innovation you've brought to the industry, the lives you've improved, this is extraordinary. I nodded, feeling a strange mix of vindication and sadness. Thank you, I said simply. Sophia was shaking her head in disbelief. Olivia, the offer we submitted last week, do you realize we're talking about over $200 million? You're about to become one of the wealthiest women in Chicago, and your family thinks you need help finding an entry-level job. The absurdity of it all hit me then, and despite everything, I started to laugh. It began as a quiet chuckle but grew until I was laughing so hard I had tears in my eyes. The stress and secrecy of the past 5 years, the cognitive dissonance of living 2 completely different lives, the sheer impossibility of this moment, it all came pouring out in waves of laughter that I couldn't control. I'm sorry, I gasped, trying to catch my breath. It's so ridiculous. Jason, your fiancé has been trying to buy my company while Mom has been trying to get me a job answering phones at a law firm. Even Jason cracked a smile at that, though he still looked shell-shocked. Olivia, I don't understand. Why didn't you trust us with this? Why did you let us think you were struggling? The laughter died away, and I was left with the weight of that question. Why hadn't I trusted them? Why had I chosen secrecy over honesty, isolation over inclusion? Because, I said slowly, searching for the right words, I needed to know that I could do it on my own. I needed to prove to myself that I was capable of building something meaningful without your approval or support. And honestly, I was afraid that if I told you and you dismissed it or didn't understand it, it would break something in me that I couldn't fix. My father, who had been unusually quiet throughout this entire exchange, finally spoke. We failed you, he said, his voice heavy with regret. We failed to see what you were building, failed to support your dreams, failed to even ask the right questions. I'm sorry, Olivia. I'm so deeply sorry. It was the first time I had ever heard my father apologize for anything, and the sincerity in his voice nearly undid me. You didn't fail me, I said, though my voice was shaky. You saw the world differently than I did. You wanted security and prestige and traditional success for me, and those aren't bad things. They're just not my things. The conversation that followed was unlike any we had ever had as a family. For the first time in my life, they asked real questions about my work, about the challenges I had faced, about the decisions I had made. Sophia, who understood the industry, helped translate some of the technical aspects for my parents, explaining the significance of what Nextech had accomplished and why it mattered. The platform you've built, she told them, it's preventing thousands of medical errors every month. Olivia's work is literally saving lives. By the time we left the restaurant that night, everything had changed. My phone was buzzing with texts from relatives who had been called immediately after dinner. My mother was already planning to properly celebrate my success, and Jason was asking if he could visit Nextech's offices to see what I had built. But the most meaningful moment came as we were saying goodbye in the restaurant's parking lot. My father pulled me aside, away from the others. I want you to know, he said quietly, that what you've accomplished is remarkable. Not just the business success, but the courage it took to pursue your vision when no one around you understood it. That takes a kind of strength I'm not sure I would have had at your age. I hugged him then, really hugged him, for the first time in years. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of family conversations, catch-up sessions, and awkward but well-meaning attempts by my parents to understand the world I had been living in. My mother bought copies of every magazine and newspaper that had ever featured Nextech, creating a scrapbook she claimed she would have made years ago, if only I had known. My father started reading healthcare technology blogs and would call me with questions about industry trends he didn't understand. The transition wasn't seamless. There were moments when they reverted to their old patterns, offering unsolicited advice about business decisions or suggesting I might want to diversify into other fields. But there were also moments of genuine pride and understanding that I had never experienced before. 3 months after the engagement dinner, Emma and I made the decision to accept Horizon's acquisition offer. $215 million for the company we had built from nothing, with the guarantee that Nextech would continue operating as an independent division under my leadership. It was more money than I had ever imagined having, and it came with the security of knowing that our platform would reach even more healthcare providers under Horizon's broader umbrella. The day the deal was announced, my parents threw an impromptu celebration dinner. Nothing fancy, just the immediate family gathered around that same mahogany table where I had spent so many evenings feeling invisible and misunderstood. But this time, the conversation centered on my work, my achievements, my future plans. I still can't believe my little sister is a multimillionaire, Jason said, raising his glass in a toast. And I definitely can't believe I'm marrying the woman who made her rich. Sophia laughed. Technically, Olivia made herself rich. I just helped facilitate the paperwork. As I sat there, surrounded by my family's newfound understanding and acceptance, I felt a complex mix of emotions. There was relief, certainly, and joy at finally being able to share my success with the people I loved. But there was also a bittersweet recognition of all the years we had lost, all the conversations we might have had, all the support I might have received if things had been different. Later that evening, as I was getting ready to leave, my mother pulled me aside. Olivia, she said, her voice soft with emotion, I need you to know how proud I am of you. Not just because of your success, but because of who you are. You had the courage to believe in yourself when we didn't, and that's something I'll always admire. Thanks, Mom, I said, feeling tears prick at my eyes. I also need to apologize, she continued. We should have seen what you were capable of. We should have supported your dreams instead of trying to redirect them. We should have asked better questions and listened more carefully to your answers. I nodded, accepting her apology while also recognizing that the path I had taken, difficult as it had been, had made me stronger in ways I was only beginning to understand. 6 months later, I was leading Nextech's integration into Horizon's broader platform while also launching new initiatives to expand our international presence. The work was challenging and rewarding, and I finally had the resources to pursue some of the more ambitious projects Emma and I had dreamed about during our garage startup days. My relationship with my family had settled into a new normal. We had monthly dinners where they asked genuine questions about my work and I shared both the successes and challenges of running a major technology division. Jason and I had grown closer than we had ever been as adults, bonding over late-night conversations about career pressures and family expectations. Even my parents had begun to understand my world well enough to offer occasionally useful advice. But perhaps the most significant change was internal. For the first time in my life, I no longer needed my family's approval to feel successful. Their acceptance and pride were wonderful gifts, but they weren't essential to my sense of self-worth. I had learned to trust my own judgment, to believe in my own vision, to find validation in the impact of my work rather than in other people's opinions of it. One evening, about a year after the engagement dinner that had changed everything, I found myself back at the Bluebird with Jason and Sophia for a quiet dinner. The conversation was easy and comfortable, full of inside jokes and shared memories. At one point, Sophia asked me if I ever regretted keeping my success secret for so long. "Do you ever wish things had been different?" she asked. "Do you wish your family had recognized your potential earlier, supported your vision from the beginning?" I considered the question carefully. "There are definitely moments I wish had been different," I said finally. "I wish there had been less doubt, less dismissal, less feeling like I had to prove myself over and over again. But I also think the struggle made me stronger. It forced me to develop an unshakable belief in myself and my vision. It taught me that external validation, while nice, isn't necessary for internal confidence." Jason nodded thoughtfully. "I think I needed to learn some of those lessons too," he said. "I spent so much of my life trying to be the perfect son, following the path that was expected of me, that I never really questioned whether it was the path I wanted. Watching you build something entirely your own has made me think about what I actually want from my career and my life." That conversation stayed with me long after dinner ended. As I drove home through the familiar streets of Chicago, past the neighborhoods where I had grown up feeling misunderstood and the downtown where I had built my company in secret, I realized that the journey had been worth it. Not just the financial success or the professional recognition, but the personal growth that had come from learning to trust myself completely. The true measure of success, I had learned, wasn't the moment when other people finally recognized your worth. It was the moment when you stopped needing them to. Today, Nextech's platform is used by healthcare providers in over 20 countries, preventing thousands of medical errors and improving communication for millions of patients every year. I've been featured on magazine covers, spoken at international conferences, and been recognized as one of the most influential women in healthcare technology. But those external markers of success, while gratifying, aren't what matter most to me. What matters most is the knowledge that I trusted my instincts when everyone around me suggested I shouldn't. What matters is the understanding that I was capable of building something meaningful and important, even when the people closest to me couldn't see its value. What matters is the recognition that success isn't about proving other people wrong, it's about proving yourself right. My family's love and support mean more to me now than they ever did when I was desperately seeking their approval. But that's because they're gifts freely given rather than validation desperately sought. The relationship we have today is built on mutual respect and genuine understanding rather than on my need for their acceptance. Sometimes people ask me what advice I would give to other entrepreneurs who feel unsupported or misunderstood by their families. My answer is always the same: believe in yourself so completely that other people's doubt becomes irrelevant. Build something so meaningful that its value is undeniable. Trust your vision so deeply that external validation becomes a nice bonus rather than a necessity. The path I took wasn't easy, and I wouldn't recommend the secrecy and isolation to anyone who has other options. But I'm grateful for the strength it taught me, for the unshakable confidence it helped me develop, and for the reminder that true success comes from within. The little girl who used to hide in her bedroom, writing code while her family discussed real careers at the dinner table, grew up to change an entire industry. And the woman she became learned that the most important approval she could ever receive was her own. That's the real story behind the engagement dinner revelation, behind the shocked faces and awkward apologies, behind the headlines about the ghost founder who finally stepped into the light. It's not a story about proving anyone wrong or getting revenge on people who doubted me. It's a story about learning to believe in yourself so completely that other people's beliefs become secondary. It's a story about finding your own definition of success and having the courage to pursue it, even when everyone around you thinks you're making a mistake. It's a story about the difference between seeking approval and earning respect, between wanting to be seen and knowing your own worth. Most importantly, it's a story about the possibility of transformation, not just personal transformation, but the transformation of relationships, of understanding, of love itself. Because when you stop trying to be who other people want you to be and start being authentically yourself, you give everyone around you permission to do the same. The engagement dinner was just one evening, one moment of revelation in a much longer journey. But it marked the beginning of a new chapter, not just for me, but for my entire family. A chapter where we could finally see each other clearly, love each other honestly, and support each other's authentic paths forward. And that, more than any business success or financial milestone, is what I consider my greatest achievement.